Welcome to Ordinary People Doing Extraordinary Things, the podcast show. I'm your host, Carrie Roberts. And today, my guest is Sherry Gaba. She is a psychotherapist and a coach. She has written a best-selling book called Love Smacked. She's also been on shows like VH1 Celebrity Rehab, CNN, Inside Edition, and more. And she's here today talking with us about how to break the cycle of relationship addiction, codependency, and toxic partnerships. So welcome, Sherry. I am so excited to have you here today.
Hi, Carrie. Thank you. And thank you for doing what you're doing in the world and allowing me to have this wonderful platform to talk about what I do.
Yes, I'm excited. Before we get into, what you're doing today, I want to start off with you personally. I'm curious, what got you into this work and why did you decide to become a psychotherapist and a coach focusing on this area?
Okay, well, I started out becoming a psychotherapist to help other single mothers. I went back to school in my 30s and I wanted to do something. I didn't want to be in sales my whole life. So I went back to school and I was a single mother and I wanted to help other single parents. And for whatever reason, it morphed into another career of working a lot with addiction. I was on Celebrity Rehab for a short time on VH1. I was married to an alcoholic. And what I realized is everything I was doing was related to that, which was a very codependent thing. So it made me really take a look at myself when I got divorced about 10 years ago. And I went, what is this? Everything's about the addict, him, the alcoholic. What is this? And I realized, wow, this is all about codependency and love addiction. So I ended up writing a book that a couple of years ago it came out and then it was rebranded. It's called Love Smacked. And it really is partly my journey and partly, what is this thing called love addiction and codependency and how does it happen? And, why do we end up attracting addicts ourselves or toxic relationships? So it's kind of an interesting thing how I landed here.
Well, yeah, I think that's great because it's like you have, in a sense, the personal experience and you go and get the education and you're putting it all together. You've been doing it for a long time. So I want to kind of go and dive right into it. When we use the idea of the term love addiction, what does that mean? And what would you say are the signs and symptoms of it?
So I think a lot of people will think of love addiction as obsessive love. Addiction, the word addiction is not a friendly word. So when people hear that, they're like, oh, I don't want to be called a love addict. But really, love addiction is when having a relationship or being in love or romance is really it's sort of your nutrition. It's why you're here. You feel very empty if you don't have this in your life. It's a process addiction. So we know what substances are, substance addiction, but it's actually a process addiction. So you could think of love addiction in the same light as an internet addiction, a gaming addiction, a shopping. It's basically mood altering behaviors, but it actually gives you the same euphoric state as a substance would. But you have things that are similar to addiction. If a breakup occurs, there's a withdrawal. You sort of go into you need a fix of that love. You want another relationship. You're just really missing that attachment that you had to that person. It's really all about filling an empty void. Going back to why I ended up in this field, I discovered in my last divorce that I had early trauma that really was the contributing factor to how I became a love addict. And so it's very, very important to not feel ashamed, not feel bad that, oh my God, how did I end up here? And, there's all kinds of early trauma. I was premature, so I didn't have that early attachment with my mother. But, you could come from a neglectful household. You could have been abused. The idea is that you become very other focused. Everything is about everything outside yourself rather than an inward experience because you need that fix. You need something to make you feel whole because you don't feel whole within yourself. So some of the signs and symptoms would be you don't have a lot of boundaries. You settle a lot for less because you don't want to be alone. You have a fear of letting go. You have a fear of the unknown. You're always changing others to fit an illusion of who you want them to be rather than who they really are. You need constant validation, affirmation. You really fear abandonment. That was my issue, fearing abandonment. And then, like I said earlier, there's withdrawal symptoms. We just basically give up who we are because being alone is so scary. So that would be, the best way I can describe love addiction.
Do you think that that this comes from, like you said, kind of how you grew up, or can this come on later in life from a previous relationship?
Well, I think you can end up being in a toxic relationship and suddenly it becomes very obsessive to you. I mean, I think another issue is the whole digital dating that goes on. I think that can be very addictive. And if you don't have a real good sense of self, even that process can become addictive. So I think it's mostly from coming from some kind of neglect, some kind of abandonment, some kind of early trauma. But yes, you can end up with a narcissist. You can end up in a toxic relationship. You could be craving what they call the love bombing phase of a narcissistic relationship, or you can end up becoming addicted to the whole process of dating by dating apps. So I think those are, I kind of throw those out as caveats, but I think really early trauma is the basis for any kind of addiction. I mean, when you think of addiction, the opposite of addiction is connection. So someone who has any kind of addiction, they're just craving connection.
I love connection's my favorite word. So that's interesting that you consider those the two opposite, and yet they're very similar in some extent. So, if somebody is kind of in a relationship, how do they know if it's toxic versus we're just having, a little bit of trouble, or maybe we're just different people, but it's not toxic? What are maybe some of the signs of something that's being in a toxic relationship?
So unhealthy relationships are usually characterized by constant worry about your partner and always obsessing about them. So it's really a toxic sign if you or your partner are altering your life habits, your needs, your wants to be with that other person. In other words, you're trying to kind of become a pretzel for them. You give up everything of yourself to be with this other person. They become the single most important thing in your life. You want to spend every minute with them. They are the object of your desire. And you basically, twist your personality and values to be with them. You can also be with someone who's abusive. So in that case, you're going to be walking on eggshells. There's going to be a lot of high trauma, where you're going to be fighting a lot. There's also this feeling of being guilty for everything, because when you're with someone who's toxic, they tend to point the finger at you. Everything is your fault. I could call this also, these are narcissists, but I don't like to overuse that word because it's being overused quite a bit. But there is sort of an overlap between being with someone who's toxic and someone who's a narcissist. So the other idea would be the fighting constantly, a lot of manipulation, a lot of control. Toxic individuals are very manipulative. They're very controlling. They're going to tell you how to dress, how your hair should look, what you should do for a living. They're going to decide whether you should be out there working or not working. A lot of yelling, a lot of insulting, a lot of criticism, a lot of, there can also be physical injury where we get into domestic violence, a lot of disrespect, a lot of betrayal, a lot of dishonesty. And, the most important thing is just this lack of self-care. You stop taking care of yourself because everything is so focused on that person that you kind of give up who you are. So you really abandon your mental health, your physical health, your, everything that you are, you lose yourself. So there's just this lack of self-care and lack of boundaries.
Yeah. And that's a pretty extensive list. And sometimes it can be all of those things or some of those things. But I think what's interesting for people that don't know this term, love bombing, what tends to happen is these relationships start off what seems amazing, and then it turns into this. So can you talk about what love bombing is, and maybe talk about why this happens? Like, what's the transition from this to something that's toxic?
So I was talking to even a client today about this. I mean, it's very important that people not feel ashamed if they end up with someone who's toxic because they've been love bombed. Love bombing is very insidious. They lavish you with attention. They lavish you with gifts. They're taking you on fancy trips. They're complimenting you. They're telling you things like, I love everything about you. I've never met anyone as perfect as you. You're the only person I want to spend time with. They bombard you with phone calls and texts. These are all red flags. But when you're a codependent or a love addict and you get your needs met only by that outside attention, you're going to be very prone to a predator love bombing you because it's going to feel so good. You can also be someone who, maybe doesn't have early trauma or love addiction issues, and you'll be sucked in by that love bombing. So it's very, like I said, very insidious. They want a commitment right away. I mean, I had a guy once say to me on our first date, I'm going to marry you. So these are all red flags to look out for. But again, it's all about not feeling bad about this because because there's that empty hole inside of you, that stuff feels good. And so you end up getting sort of sucked into that. So it's important that, you understand the whole dynamic, and then you end up in this relationship where they then suddenly kind of have you, and then the abuse starts. And you're always hoping that they're going to go back to that love bombing phase. And that is what keeps you stuck. That's what we call a trauma bond. You're always wanting to go back to that early phase of love bombing. But love bombing wasn't really sincere. It was just all a manipulation to get you in the relationship.
The person that is doing the love bombing and creating this toxicity, are they aware that this is happening most of the time? Because if these, these are pretty common signs that we're seeing over and over again, is this something that they're aware of or no?
Is the toxic person aware?
Mm-hmm.
I think they are aware. I think they're very manipulative. I think they're predators. I think they do. If they're a true narcissist, they actually they don't have an understanding of what your perception is or what your perspective is or how you feel. They lack empathy, but they know what they're doing, and they can pretend that they have empathy. They can pretend that they really care about you and they really want to, know you and see you and understand you and love you, but they really are incapable. So I think they do know what they're doing, but they can also act like they really care about you, but it's really not sincere. Does that make sense?
Yeah, which kind of, this kind of brings to the question of, if you're noticing these signs, like, well, what should somebody be looking for? What is something that is healthy, that is gradual? What does that look like and feel like?
I think gradual is slow and steady wins the race, right? I mean, if somebody is bombarding you with phone calls and texts and telling you they're going to marry you on the first date, that's certainly a red flag, right? So it should be just, slow, steady, healthy, nurturing. There isn't that manipulation. There isn't that criticism. It feels healthy. You don't have that. A lot of times people who end up in these toxic relationships have sort of a knowing, but they deny it, because they want to be with someone so badly that they deny it. So it's really, really understanding yourself, getting back and being connected to you, so you know when something doesn't feel right, when it's not okay. I mean, the difference between being in love and having an unhealthy obsession with your partner, it's really healthy relationships are, couples will meet and they idealize each other, but then they form an attachment, but love matures. It's not so intense. It becomes more secure. Their trust develops. People with love addiction, they never get past that initial stage of falling in love. They're always on that high. They're always idealizing that person. They're in love with being in love, and they never feel secure enough. They never trust themselves. They don't trust the person that they're with. They become very dependent on the person and in a very unrealistic way. And they really hope that person's going to create some kind of happily ever after. And it's very unrealistic. So I think that sort of is the difference between healthy and unhealthy. I mean, unhealthy really is, you're never going to be truly satisfied because nobody can fill that void up. That void is that connection with yourself. Love addiction is really, or toxic relationships are really based on a psychological bondage rather than a healthy bond.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And like I said, it's when you start to kind of understand and notice the differences and the signs, you'll be able to tap into it a little bit more. When we talk about this idea of obsession, I think like I know a lot of people talk about, again, like movies or media, and when for girls especially, like the Disney movies and the prince on the white horse or things of that nature. We watch these movies and these people fall in love in 2 weeks and get married. Where does this obsession stem from, and where does kind of media and content that we're watching play a role in all of this?
Well, I think about even Disney. I think about the print. It's changing. Yeah. It's absolutely changing. And I know it's changing. But think about all the princesses we grew up with. I'm probably older than you, but for me, it was, Snow White and Cinderella. And there's, now there was, then when my daughter was growing up, there was Ariel. And there's always this prince that's going to rescue them. And so I think that's kind of where it begins. And then there's a lot of movies that have obsession in them. I'll probably age myself, but I think this is a classic movie, Fatal Attraction. And, Glenn Close plays this crazy person, and she's stalking Michael Douglas and doing all this crazy stuff. And then there was a movie with Beyonce called Obsessed. So there are movies out there that kind of show this kind of obsession. But yeah, it's always think about the music you listen to. A lot of the country music is very codependent, love addictive, right? I mean, being in love is great, but it becomes, I can't live without you, I'm nothing without you. I mean, all this stuff really creates this need to have someone else feel what really you need to feel within yourself. And I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, the question also is if we have to kind of feel it in ourselves, if somebody says, well, how do I do that? Like, do you have a suggestion of how do you connect better to yourself? How do you fill that void so you don't end up with people like this?
So I had to really go very deep. I'd already been a therapist. I'd done a lot of work on myself, but I actually had to get into trauma therapy, where I actually had to become embodied within myself, because I had a really hard time being present, because that really is the opposite of addiction, not being present, because you're always looking outside of yourself. So one of the things you can do if you are someone that's had early trauma is to find a great trauma therapist. And I say therapist, not coach. I know there's a lot of coaches out there doing trauma work. I think it can be very dangerous, to be perfectly honest. I think you have to find someone who's done all the hours of training, somebody that has done the work. And so you want to find someone that is either they're doing somatic work, they're doing EMDR, they're doing tapping. All of these things are going to help you heal past trauma so you can get back to your core self. And so that is the best advice I can give you, is to really, if you feel that you're kind of outside yourself and you're always looking for outside yourself, even if it's, material things, it could, again, we're talking about relationships, but whatever it is, drugs, alcohol, you really need a good trauma therapist.
Yeah, I am a huge advocate of therapy. I agree. I think it helps on so many different levels and ways that sometimes family or friends, or as you said, coaches can't. So having that background is a huge piece of
I mean,
it.
I actually got, I ended up taking classes and started learning all about somatic work. And so now that is mostly what I do today with clients, is the trauma work, because
Yeah.
I know that it was life-changing for me. And I know it can be life-changing for someone out there. I mean, it's really learning how to regulate your nervous system, learning how to self-soothe, learning how to feel comfortable with yourself. I mean, all these things about getting self-esteem and this and that, that's all great, but it has to start with being within yourself. And a lot of people just don't know how to do that.
Yeah. Do you find, I mean, there's always the idea that like this concept of, the law of attraction, that, when you're really connected to yourself, the right things, the right people, the right experiences will come your way. And so it's not always about searching outwardly or trying to go after something. Do you kind of subscribe to that thought process in terms of what we're talking about, or do you have
Yeah,
another idea?
that's a great question. I do believe in the law of attraction in terms of action steps. Like if you want to create a life, you got to take these action steps. However, your action steps have to match how you feel inside. And so if you still don't feel good inside, there's this lack of incongruency. So I just bought a beach house, and I don't really believe that I could have, and that was a dream my whole life. I don't think I could have done that and taken such a drastic step if I didn't have that connection with me, because I trusted me. I said, I can do this. I can do this. And so it's kind of a funny example, but yes, I believe the law of attraction works. I think dreams can be, you can manifest all kinds of stuff, but you've got to be congruent and feel it inside, because if you don't, then there's a disconnect. There has to be a connection between what's going on, your action on the outside, and how you feel on the inside.
Yeah. I was just thinking too, if somebody has been through the experiences you're talking about, and they've gotten out, they've done the work, and now they're going into this kind of dating world again. Sometimes, when we experience things, there's this sense of fear that it could happen again. Do you have any thoughts or advice in terms of kind of getting rid of that fear and finding that ability to trust yourself so you don't get into something like this again?
That's a great question. So, that was the story of my life. I just kept repeating, different name, different face, same person. And I talk a lot about that in my book, Love Smack. I want people to know that how they feel today, before that maybe they've started to do the deep work, is going to be different 3 months from now, 6 months from now. So I know that maybe someone out there that's just had a really bad relationship or a really difficult breakup, or they keep attracting the same kind of person. Remember that once you start doing this work, you will be a different person, and you will be able to trust yourself, because you'll be able to be with yourself. I mean, people that don't trust themselves don't feel comfortable within their own skin. And once you feel comfortable with your own skin and you can be with yourself, you will be able to better trust your decisions. And that's really the truth. I mean, I'm not saying that you won't get there won't be someone that'll come around and try to love bomb you, but there'll be more of a knowing inside yourself. You will have more of an intuition. You will be able to see the red flags. You'll be able to feel the red flags. You will know when that guy says to you on a first date, I want to marry you, you're going to know, this doesn't feel that right. Why? Because you've been doing the work to really get in touch with yourself.
Yeah, no, I love it. You are just a wealth of information, and I'm keeping conscious of our time. If people want to learn more about anything we spoke about, they want to connect with you, where can they do that? And I'm also adding in your ebook for here as well. So where can they connect with you?
Okay, great. So the ebook that you're putting out there is Narcissistic Partners and Obsessive Love at sherrygaba.com/NP quiz. And then I have a wonderful program. It's an online coaching program, and it's for people that are struggling with love addiction or toxic relationships. And for your listeners, Carrie, I'm offering it for $1. And it's online coaching. It's modules, all sorts of lessons, video lessons, expert interviews. It's just a treasure trove of information. And then I go live once a month. So it's $1 to check it out. And that's at wakeuprecovery.com/IG1. wakeuprecovery.com/IG1.
Perfect. And the last question I like to ask all of my guests, Sherry, is what is one word or quote or mantra that you try to live by every single day?
Never give up.
I love it. Well, I thank you so much. I congratulate you on the work you've done on yourself and the way you're helping others and just the advice that you've given today. And I look forward to learning and hearing more. So thank you for being here.
You are so welcome. And again, thank you for having me.